I want to raise the standard of care for both clients and candidates. Too many clients have unhappy stories of how a search concluded or failed to conclude. I absolutely realized the world did not need another mainstream recruiter. The world did need a recruiter that was going to be more purpose-driven, more creative, more committed to long-term relationships.
Hi, I'm Belden Menkus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders are doing and what they've learned along the way. My guest today is Kate Grussing CBE, founder and managing director of Sapphire Partners, a pioneering executive search firm known for championing inclusive leadership and diverse boardroom representation. Kate launched Sapphire in 2005. A committed advocate for gender equity, purposeful leadership, and long-term value creation, Kate was awarded a CBE in 2021 for her contribution to business. Kate, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist.
Thank you so much, Belden. I'm excited to be here.
Just to get us started, maybe you can tell us a bit about Sapphire Partners and about yourself, just so we get a sense of where it is and a little bit of how it got there.
So I'd spent a decent spell of my career as a management consultant and an investment banker, and those are very people-oriented businesses. And I was increasingly getting calls from headhunters to tempt me to look at roles or to tap my network. And as I grew in my career, I appreciated that while getting the strategy was really important and getting the financial engineering right was really important, actually, if you didn't have the right people in the right roles, the best strategy or the best financial resources weren't going to get you very far. And so I got more and more interested in what made high-performing teams. And I knew from my time in banking how much we spent on recruitment, on how much of the recruitment wasn't successful, and on how the pipeline got really thin at a pretty modest level of the pyramid when it came to senior women and ethnic minorities. And I perceived there was an opportunity for a more creative search firm that wasn't just about musical chairs, that looked more broadly at people's skill sets and also thought more broadly about careers which are long. And in asking a few really well-established search consultants about what they thought their firms could do to promote more diversity, I was amazed at how disinterested they were, short-termist their answers were, at how they thought I was kind of crazy, perhaps naive, and overly ambitious and idealistic. To me, it felt like it was not a well-functioning market. And the world of little black books, who went to school with who, was not the way to think about building great companies and charities. And that inspired me to think about setting up a search firm that was much more purposeful in how it brought top talent to the table and how it supported its clients and its candidates, because it's not just about keeping the clients happy. If the candidates aren't happy, then it's not going to be a successful partnership.
So if you had to sum up that purpose when you got started, what would you say it was? And then has it evolved over the years?
Yes, I'd say the purpose was to be more enlightened and creative in recruiting exceptional talent and not only looking at the usual suspects, but working harder to find candidates who were off the radar, perhaps in a different sector, perhaps under a rock somewhere because they never left their organization. And we had a very strong focus initially on both flexible working and women. And there was a real deficit of women in flexible roles, in senior leadership roles. I'd say we did have to pivot and refine our strategy. Focusing on interim roles or project roles or part-time roles wasn't very successful. And part of that is interim roles or project roles. It's often how quickly can you get someone? There's less degree of, all right, we'll wait for the right person. And there's also less ability to, all right, well, we can be more open-minded. It's often, all right, we need someone who has helped create a strategy for adhesive plasters. And if you create a strategy for surgical instruments, I'm sorry, that's not close enough. We need someone who's created a strategy for plasters. So we honed in on what I saw as a more value-added side, which is focusing on more senior roles, both permanent and board, and also broadening from the women focus. And while a very large proportion of the working population are women, and they're incredibly well-educated and well-trained, diversity comes in many shapes and sizes. And ethnic diversity is important, as is socioeconomic, as is neurodiversity. So I didn't want to be anti-men, for example. I wanted us to help our clients find really creative candidates. And I would feel great knowing that my colleagues and I had brought them candidates that other search firms would not. And maybe that was what appeared to be a privileged, white, Anglo-Saxon man. But the reality is that he grew up in India. And his cultural background is Indian, but you wouldn't know that by looking at his name and his picture. And so we would have to do a better job of getting to know our candidates to understand what you see isn't always what you get. And we'd also do a better job of investing in understanding what kind of person would be successful at client A versus client B. Just because they're both asset managers or banks or law firms, those firms are going to have really different cultures and styles.
Yeah. You've a few times in telling that sort of said we thought about the strategy. If you can, take me into the room. Who's the we and what are they doing and how did it all work?
So I definitely wanted to set up with others. I intentionally did not want to name the company after myself or my co-founder. I really believed in having the word partners in there because we partner with both our clients and our candidates. And even from the get-go, my co-founder and I chose the word Sapphire because we thought it was high quality, durable, feminine without being feminist, and it had the word hire in it.
Oh, I never caught that one. Oh, that's fantastic.
Now, to be honest, it didn't occur to me for about 6 months that it had the word hire in it. So I've always had a team around me. I've always tried to recruit people who I thought were complementary and different. I did not have a background in recruitment and headhunting while I had used headhunters. So I purposely recruited individuals who had worked for both big search firms and smaller search firms. Obviously, our strategy evolved. We set up in 2005. We had a really good early 2 and a bit years. And then the global financial crisis hits, and Lehman Brothers was one of our best clients. So, we had to do a massive retrenchment and rebuild. The strategy has certainly evolved. The focusing, for example, on flexible roles and project roles was something we did a bit in the first 2 years. We always knew we couldn't be all things to all clients, but one is opportunistic, and you have to put out a lot of approaches to potential clients and see which ones resonate. Your hit rate's going to improve over time, but the vast majority of initial conversations might not lead anywhere for the first 6 or 12 or 18 months.
Mm-hmm. And so you talked about that pivot sort of around 2008. Have there been any other kind of major shifts, or has it largely been once you came out of that, it was sort of you knew where you were going, you knew who you were, and it was just a matter of making it happen?
I'd say that the broadening of diversity and the lens of what was off-the-grid talent has certainly continued, and the terrible George Floyd tragedy encouraged many of our clients to think more broadly about the ethnic diversity they had in their leadership ranks. And while it had been a priority of Sapphire's for a long time to build our network with Black and Asian talent, I wouldn't say we had had a hugely receptive client base before the George Floyd tragedy.
we've known each other for a while, so it's a story in some ways I've heard bits of anyway before. But what strikes me is, to some extent, maybe by design, you've sort of been in front of some of the market shifts. Does it feel that way to you, or does it feel like, no, no, we haven't really been? And if so, what do you see coming? What do you see ahead? Because there are those who would argue that everything's sort of been running in one direction for a good period of time, and now it's stopped or maybe even heading in a different direction. Just curious how you're seeing it.
I feel super proud that Sapphire has been a thought leader, and I would often use the metaphor of I felt like a salmon swimming upstream. And there are now many more search firms and recruiters that talk about diversity. So there are many more salmon in that stream, which I think is a good thing, even if not all of them have the same commitment. And broadening how we think about assessing candidates. Sapphire, as a boutique search firm, is always going to be serving a relatively small number of clients. It's a very fragmented market. But I want to raise the standard of care for both clients and candidates. And too many clients have unhappy stories of how a search concluded or failed to conclude. I absolutely realized the world did not need another mainstream recruiter. The world did need a recruiter that was going to be more purpose-driven, more creative, more committed to long-term relationships. I think a fascinating disconnect is on the right balance of being in the office versus working hybrid. And there's that disconnect between, for example, US companies and European companies. I perceive that disconnect between older, more experienced managers and junior employees. I'd say even between some women and men, although obviously there are many men who enjoy hybrid working too. The jury is out, absolutely. And it's hugely helpful for men and women to be able to spend more time working from home or working from another location. It allows companies to recruit from a broader geographic pool. It helps climate change. We have fewer people getting in their cars, less money spent on transportation or downtime on airplanes. There is a downside. Many professions you learn by being at the elbow of your more senior lawyer, accountant, banker, you name it. And the younger employees or the employees working from home more, I think it's probably optimistic to assume they're getting the same amount of feedback as their colleagues who are in the office. Now, careers are going to be longer. They are absolutely marathons and not sprints.
Do you really think that's happening? I kind of wonder. I still hear of people sort of feeling like, I'm 55 and it's kind of that's it. I could maybe get some Ned roles, and many do, but sort of people don't want me anymore. Is that just a few people, or?
I'm an optimist. And I think the benefit of proverbial gray hair and real world experience makes one a better leader and coach and salesperson and academic or researcher. But, I guess my advice to any individual is you have to stay sharp. You have to keep learning. You can't put it into neutral or into slow gear without thinking that there will be impact. So for example, I'm a big fan of sabbaticals. Now, not enough companies have them. Not enough people take their companies up on them when they do have them. But I think, we need our human capital to keep working. We have fewer young people having fewer kids. So we can't be losing the 55-year-olds. Now, I'm not saying they should stay in the same job they've been in their entire career. Not at all.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in long careers and people continuing to bring value to the world in lots of different ways, not necessarily always through a, kind of full-time paid job, but we're coming from the same place on this. Some of this maybe you've touched on already, but clearly since 2005, the way organizations think about leadership and talent has changed materially. What for you stands out?
I think the extent to which companies are more open-minded at realizing that employees have lives outside of the office. And so embracing the ability to work anytime, anywhere. We work with a lot of companies or professions who are in what I call greedy jobs. A senior banker, for example, or a private equity investor, that is definitely a greedy job. The job will take up a lot of your time and energy. They're very hard to contain. You're 48 weeks a year. And so the benefit of first BlackBerries, that now iPhones, now Teams and Zoom calls, which allow people to spend time at their cabin in Aberdeenshire, but still be productive and have a client conversation, or spend time with their parent who might have dementia and is going to need caring for a long, long time. That's a great thing for helping that senior leader cope with a greedy job, extend their tenure at that organization, to be a role model for younger parents. And COVID helped in that regard, absolutely, where suddenly so many roles that we thought couldn't be done remotely were. I think there's been a fabulous embracing of senior leaders doing that from different countries. We don't all have to be at our computers Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Yeah. Many times I suspect people are saying, we need someone who's going to fit in with our culture. And yet also they often want diversity, some fresh perspective. What do you think about the balance of that? How do you help clients navigate through those choices?
We spend a lot of time with a client up front understanding why would someone really want to join here? And when a recruit hasn't worked out, what went wrong? And so that we don't let our client make that same mistake. And I think too many people recruit in their own image. If I was a world-class synchronized swimmer, suddenly I look back in 10 years and, there are a lot of synchronized swimmers on my team. Well, guess what? They might be really good HR directors or general counsels or board directors. And so really helping our clients think about what's different, what's additive. So in boards, for example, and most leadership teams do a much better job today of succession planning and what I would call a skills matrix. While a board may need everyone on it to have strong financial acumen, you do not want a board full of accountants, for example. For example, there are more and more HR directors or people with strong human capital backgrounds going onto boards. I think that's a really good thing. Now, if they've only ever been HR directors, that will impede their ability to say, I have really strong financial acumen. Now, of course, an HR director is overseeing an incredibly large and complex cost base, typically. But they also need exposure to the top line.
That almost sounds like there's some advice lurking around in there.
Absolutely. So whatever level one is, whether you're a middle manager or a senior manager or on an exco or on a board, do a little matrix and think about what are the skills in my team? What do I need for the future? And all right, it might be a bit rough and ready. Someone may say, I'm a really good strategist. There are obviously different sorts of strategists. Someone may say, I'm really good at technology. Well, that's a really broad church. So that skills matrix needs to have granularity in the areas that are most essential. There probably isn't just one column for technology anymore, for example.
And if you think about the process that sort of we've been kind of talking about, which is how executives get recruited, how succession gets planned, how do you think that might look different in, say, 5 years than it does today?
Well, the tenure of really senior leaders has been shrinking. And we expect our most senior leaders to be on all the time, to cope with incredible demands, both internal and external, and to be superhuman. Well, the reality is that, most senior leaders, we all have development needs, and organizations that can help their senior leaders not just lean on their strengths, play to what they're already good at. Again, COVID really taught us the importance of having a really broad risk register. And so from a talent standpoint, people are going to say, I need a break, or I need to go care for my sick wife, or I need to go spend time with my father who's just had a terminal diagnosis. Careers are long, and organizations have a complex jigsaw, and the ability to help fill those gaps when someone has that sort of life crisis, that then shows we're all irreplaceable. It's a great way of helping to bring along the next generation, helping to elongate careers, helping to make our organizations more empathetic and supportive.
So coming back to this topic of sort of purpose and strategy and how you do that, do you have a annual kind of, we're going to all go off somewhere and talk about strategy? Do you every 5 years sit down and map it out by yourself on a whiteboard? Is there even a Sapphire Partners strategy that's, you could pick up and wave at me if you felt like it?
There is, I'd say I probably take it off and update it and dust it at least once a year. We stayed pretty true to our mission and our purpose, although clearly one rethinks tactics. The strategy needs to be really aligned with your purpose. And I can certainly articulate the strategy far better today than I could 20 years ago.
Yeah, in fairly simple terms, what's the strategy?
Sapphire's strategy is to help our clients recruit exceptional, impactful, hard-to-find leaders who will have impact that sometimes can be hard to measure, but over the course of that individual's career and tenure with the company, will yield dividends because they've either been a role model or a culture change or a pioneer, and will have acted as a magnet for other talent like themselves.
Mm-hmm. In some ways, that almost sort of sounds like your purpose all over again. And to be kind of pointed about it, I guess I'm wondering, do you spend much time thinking about, well, which sectors should we be serving? Should we be going after big clients or little clients? Or do we need to have an office in Manchester? Or is it more, there's a certain thing we do, we need to make sure people know what we do, and they'll kind of come to us and it'll all be fine?
No, it's a great question. I'm very realistic. Well, we work with a small number of big clients. Big clients tend to think they need to work with big recruiters and search firms. I think it's a bit of a misperception. And a small number of big companies realize that there's a huge benefit in horses for courses. For example, we tried to develop clients in FMCG. We found those clients were not as talent focused, they're more brand focused. And so law firms and consulting firms and asset managers were more likely to embrace Sapphire because their assets went up and down the lift every day. Whereas if I'm Coke or Unilever, my assets are my brands.
That's interesting. To some extent, your clients kind of get the logic, the strategic logic of why Sapphire exists.
I think it's a bit of the chicken versus the egg dilemma, I presume. I think companies or clients that are less enlightened are more focused on the status quo, who are very happy just recruiting from their competitors or just recruiting themselves directly, are less likely to be excited about working with Sapphire. And our impact with them will probably be more limited.
Sure. Particularly as it sounds like part of the benefit you're bringing, part of the promise is this person's going to bring you value in ways that none of us can see right now. And it may take a while for that to play out, but sort of, trust us, it'll be there. And I assume that some of these relationships are fairly long standing, so they must be feeling like you're about right on that.
No, absolutely. We have some clients who've been with us for 20 years. And we grow a lot by referral. And so a former colleague or a client is quite typical. They'll take us to their next company or their next board. And those are our favorite clients.
Yeah, yeah. So you've been leading Sapphire for a while, a few years. And I know you've been talking about careers being marathons. Again, I'm on record as saying I want to retire when I'm 80. Um, so I'm planning, to kind of keep going for a while. But if you think 20 years from now, what would you like to see Sapphire being or doing at that point?
I've been thinking a lot about that question since this is a milestone year. And I want Sapphire to continue being a thought leader and a challenger brand. I mean, we won't be a teenager then. And I think there's a real strength in being smaller and being able to, turn down work and focus on a narrower set of clients. I have a great next generation in my team who I hope will be leading the business. I can't imagine I'm going to be playing golf and tennis. I would wanting to be coaching and sponsoring and championing them. And, I think the exposure to younger talent will keep me young and fresh.
Sorry, a question I feel almost like is not quite, but close to required by law now of podcast hosts. How do you think AI is going to change, the world of recruitment and kind of the world of work more generally? Is it going to be as seismic as everybody says, or is it one more bit of technology? It'll make a difference, but, much will stay the same.
I think it will help us all be more productive. And I think it will, the low level work that, much as, a few years ago, Google and search engines helped us revolutionize the way we did things. I am embracing it and don't see it in a catastrophic way. I'm hoping it will free us up to do the more value-added work. Most senior professionals have used LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a fabulous Rolodex, if I can call it that, and it makes talent more visible. It doesn't tell you how good someone is, right? So someone could have a fabulous LinkedIn profile with lots of, wonderful brands listed and descriptions, and that individual could still be a real poison pill. No amount of AI searching will show you that that could be a poisonous personality. So if it helps my colleagues do a better job of identifying, all right, who's out there, then that's a good thing. But the extra elbow grease and the time to decipher caliber and culture and style and chemistry, that's the much greater value added.
Anything we haven't touched on that you'd like listeners to know about?
I think being able to articulate your purpose isn't just something for leaders or people in their 40s or 50s or leading teams or businesses. And so I would want to encourage younger people to think about their purpose, constantly challenging yourself to think about, well, what difference can I make? And how do I want to help my employer or this planet or my university or the charity I'm involved with? And you don't have to have just one purpose. It should continue to adapt and morph.
I think that question, how can I help, is a really great one. I suspect when I was, maybe even now, but certainly earlier in my career, if somebody said, what's your purpose? Well, I know kind of the things I like doing and I know what I'm good at. I don't know if I could articulate a purpose so much, but how can I help? I think it just seems to me like a really great practical clue into that question.
Yeah. Now, purpose feels a little bit intimidating. Or certainly I would have been a little bit shy for words if you'd asked me that question in my 20s. So I would encourage your listeners not to underestimate the impact they can have, whether it's encouraging someone to go for a job where they may feel underqualified, whether it's to ask for a sabbatical, whether it's to be brave and think about, how could I do this job creatively? Could I job share it? As I said earlier, careers are long. I'm a big believer in the 100-year life. I'm not so arrogant as to be able to predict what the careers of the future are, but certainly the world's going to benefit if more of us stay relevant and active and engaged and keep working. And that might be in a voluntary capacity. And it might be, doing a massive pivot But retirement at the age of 65 or whatever, I don't think is good for the planet. And we need to keep people having impact, whether it's with their local schools, with charities, with companies, and finding a way to stay engaged and relevant will be good for mankind as well as our GDP.
You've mentioned that you tend to work with larger clients. If someone were CEO or the HR director, or whatever, of a somewhat smaller client, but nevertheless wanted to bring to their organization some of the benefits and power of a more diverse workforce, and particularly a more diverse kind of leadership group. But I'm just wondering, are there other resources or approaches that you might suggest?
So I worry I misspoke. I love working with small to medium-sized companies, and that's our bread and butter.
So give you a call.
Absolutely.
Okay, give you a call. Good. I'm really glad I asked.
No, I want to work with a company where my colleagues and I can get our arms around it. And we're not one of 20 suppliers. And, smaller organizations have to work harder because they may not have the brand name of, let's say, a Barclays or a Lloyd's Bank. And I think can benefit more from an enlightened search firm who can help be their ambassador and complement what their name might be lacking because they're perhaps more of a specialist. But I think there are a lot of creative things that companies can do, whether it's looking at their local geographic area, recruiting from adjacent sectors, creating forums that will help identify talent for the future, having individuals in the leadership who talk about why we're a particularly interesting company. So I'm a huge believer in the ability of smaller companies to attract talent because so many of the senior leaders I meet want to have more impact.
You talked about creating forums. My guess is, as you said that, you had a pretty rich picture in your head of what that is and how a smaller business might be able to do that. But just, if you can, say a few more words about that.
Sure. So I'll give an example. I created about 10 years ago a group of senior women investors. And most of them have been senior investment professionals their whole lives, investing with pension funds or foundations or assets, getting returns for savers and pensioners. But they don't necessarily know each other. They've had their head down, focused on trying to beat the markets and trying to get a good return. And so I launched, with the support of a few senior women I knew in the industry, a network of, exactly as I called it, senior women in fund management. And we get together roughly once a quarter, and it's a way for women investors to meet their peers, to get some independent advice, to test market trends, to do a bit of competitive intelligence. And over the last 10 years, we've grown to be a really impactful group of about 165 senior women investors. Obviously, the snowball gathers speed and momentum. So I think at the first dinner, we probably had 12 people. And I've just made an effort to constantly bring along the next generation, to have what I call a few other godmothers. This isn't Kate's network. This is this women's network. And I feel like I've done this wonderful legacy for the sector and showed women fund managers what they can be when they decide to retire from their full-time jobs, to help keep women who maybe have lost their jobs or been made redundant stay connected to the markets and their colleagues. And for the women who are now retired, for them to feel connected to the industry and to meet younger women and feel like they're able to share their wisdom.
Yeah, that's a great example. Kate, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your experience, as well as your optimism and your kind of enthusiasm for the future. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you.
Belden, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity, and I'm a huge believer in your work, taking a deeper dive into looking at purpose and strategy.
Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave us a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.